Welcome everybody. This is the seminar for the benefits of veterans, sponsored by the Japanese Mutual Aid Society of Chicago in conjunction with the JASC. And we're presenting monthly, bi-monthly seminars throughout the year to help the community. And this is the second of this series. For those of you who don't know, the Mutual Aid Society was formed in 1935, and the primary mission is to buy and sell cemetery plots for sale to the Japanese American community. And as community service, we also do projects to benefit the community. So this is one of those. I'd like to introduce Mike Takata now from the JASC.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Japanese American Service Committee. We are pleased to work together with the Japanese Mutual Aid Society. This is an example of ongoing collaborations with the within the Japanese American community. As many of you know, the Japanese American Service Committee was formed in 1946 to help Japanese Americans after the incarceration experience during World War II. Our predecessors established the organization to help families reconnect, reestablish themselves, find housing, jobs, and social services for their families. And I am proud to be a part of this organization. Currently, we are continuing to work to provide these types of services and spread information to families. And again, thank you very much to Mutual Aid Society to approaching us and bringing this particular program and the others to the community. And we look forward to future cooperative events. At this point, I'd like to introduce Brian Funai from Masuda Funai, who has been instrumental in putting this program together. So, Brian.
Thank you, Mike. My name is Brian Funai. I'm on the board of directors of the Japanese Mutual Aid Society of Chicago, and I would like to thank you all for coming out tonight. I know that there was a lot of competition with the Cubs game, and we'll try to give you updates on the score as we get that. More importantly, I'd like to thank all of you because you are our veterans. We owe you a debt of gratitude, both as a third-generation Japanese American for the sacrifices that you made on our behalf, and also for the sacrifices that you made on behalf of our country. In conjunction with the celebration of Veterans Day, which is going to be on the 11th, we have decided to try to put on a seminar which is going to help people navigate through the Veterans Benefits system and the programs. And we are pleased tonight to have Frank Del Barto to speak on those issues. Frank is a shareholder at Masuda Funai, Eifert & Mitchell, where he chairs the employment practice group of that firm, where he works primarily in employment benefits, compensation, and representing companies and individuals on various employment matters. More importantly, Frank is a veteran. He is a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute, and after graduation, he served in the U.S. Army, where he graduated from the Airborne School and Ranger School. By the time he separated from service, he was a tank battalion commander?
I wish.
Squadron commander.
I was a tank platoon leader.
He was a tank platoon leader, and he held the rank of captain. For those of you who have been in the Chicago area for a long time, after he separated from the military, He worked for Honda and Associates, the insurance agency that many of you may or may not be familiar with, while he was going to law school. He graduated from the John Marshall Law School and he commenced his legal career. Frank's passion project and his pro bono service to the community has been in the area of veterans benefits. He has been recognized by both the John Marshall Law School, the American Bar Association, and the Chicago Bar Association for his service to our veterans and assisting them with veterans benefits. So tonight, even though we don't have the video, he will be discussing veterans benefits, and I'd like to introduce Frank at this time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me tonight. What I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time with you tonight trying to help you navigate the Veterans Benefit System and try and demystify it as best we can. I can tell you that at the end of the night we won't be experts at it, but hopefully I can give you a couple of tips or keys on how to navigate this system that we have. And as Brian said, first I have to thank you guys for your service from one veteran to another. We're a special class of people, and many of you stood up and stepped forward when many others stepped back. And that's still going on today. So we have many veterans today who are stepping up and moving towards the guns while everybody else is walking away from the guns. So as Brian said, I did graduate from the Virginia Military Institute. I am an armor officer by trade, which also gave me my disability for the VA. So I am actually deaf, just about. So I do have a hearing profile from the VA. I do have a tinnitus problem. And one of the first claims I actually worked with the VA was my own. So I wanted to try and figure out how the VA system worked. I did have the experience with the VA from my father growing up. It was not a good experience, but I was in high school at the time. So I really didn't understand what he was going through in trying to navigate the bureaucracy that's the VA. But we can work through that together, and we'll do that tonight. As Brian said, I work a lot with veterans. I'm privileged that Masuda Fanai allows me to do that. I've worked with a World War II veteran. Many of my veterans are Vietnam veterans right now, and I work with a dependent of a Vietnam veteran right now who has experienced birth defects based on Agent Orange. So that's the kind of things I'm working on right now. I have 4 active cases that I'm working on behalf of the John Marshall Law School. And I couldn't do this work without the John Marshall Law School. I don't know if you've been there lately, but the John Marshall Law School is on Jackson and Plymouth, and they have a full-fledged veterans clinic. It's right there in the front of the school. It's a clinic that was donated, the money was donated by the state of Illinois, and the clinic is run by students. So the clinic and the students at the law school are running the clinic. They're taking in the claims, and they're triaging the claims. And the clinic is very special because it's been set up to deal with PTSD and some of the new challenges that many of the veterans are coming back with now. So the spaces are open, the desks are set up a certain way. It's a very open, welcoming environment. And the idea is that the veteran will come in and talk to the student. The student is a law student who's volunteering his or her time. They triage the claim and they help the veteran work through what's it going to take to get your claim, your disability claim, through the VA system. And they also work with the veteran and say, okay, you've got 3 claims, this one is your best. So let's go with this one first and we'll see where we go from there. So I do a lot of that work with the Veteran Center. They then send out memos to attorneys who have volunteered in the Chicago area. And the memo that I receive from the clinic tells me what's wrong with the veteran, what the veteran has presented, what the law may be on this particular issue. So by the time I get the claim, I've got a pretty good idea of where I need to go. As Brian said, I do have an Army background. My dad was a Master Sergeant. He was medically retired from the Army in about 6 months at the age of 47. So he was stationed at Fort Sheridan. I was in high school at the time. He went up to Great Lakes because he was feeling tired, and within 6 months he was out of the U.S. Army. And that was obviously challenging for him because the Army was what he loved. My brother is a Iraq veteran. He served 2 tours in Iraq, and currently he has 100% disability rating from the VA because of his time in Iraq. So let's kind of, if we could, try and think about what we're talking about here. If you notice on the bottom of the presentation, what I did was kind of recreate the U.S. Army operations order. So we've got a situation, we've got a mission, we've got an execution, we've got command and control, and command and support and control. And if you remember back to your Army days, that was the five paragraph operation order. That's the way we ran all of our missions. And so I'll try and do that for you tonight. So go into slide number 3 in the situation section there. I've got a lot of dates there. And those dates start to talk about how the U.S. started to care for its veterans. And it really started back in the Plymouth colony, where they had decided that the soldiers that defended the colony should be protected. So that's really where this concept of protecting soldiers in the United States has come from. In 1776, in order to encourage enlistments, they created pensions for the Continental Army. So when the soldiers got out of the Continental Army, they would have some money to get out of the Army, again, to encourage enlistments. Probably the biggest jump in veterans care came as a result of the Civil War. In 1861, it was the first time the U.S. government actually purchased land to create veteran cemeteries. And there's about 300,000 Civil War soldiers who are buried in veteran cemeteries. About half of those veterans are unknown. So obviously they went from all over the United States to fight in the Civil War. The identification of soldiers wasn't what it was today. So almost half of the 300,000 veterans in the Civil War are unidentified veterans. Clearly, there was World War I. World War I put a lot of emphasis on different types of challenges for the VA, or the VA didn't exist at this time. There was the Veterans Bureau. And the Veterans Bureau was set up to take care of soldiers as well. But World War I created a lot of challenges. As you remember, mustard gas, machine guns, tanks. War became mechanized and very, very deadly in a different type of way. And so veterans were able to survive that, but they had debilitating challenges when they came back to the United States. So after World War I, there was a big push for veterans care. In the 1921 and 30, the Veterans Bureau consolidated with another organization to try and improve the care. And then obviously, as many of you know, the biggest push for veterans care was after World War II, or just as World War II was ending, with the GI Bill. One of the most famous parts of that GI Bill was obviously the education benefits that many veterans took advantage of, and the home loan program. So the home loan program, as you see there in the numbers, and I apologize that I can't project them for you, fully 20% of the home loans in the United States were guaranteed by the VA. That home loan program, as we know, still exists today, and that is the only component of the GI Bill that's still in its original form, in the sense that it guarantees home loans for veterans. In 1988, President Reagan elevated the Department of Veteran Affairs, or the Veterans Administration, to a cabinet-level position. And obviously, as we know, President Reagan was a friend of the military. The M1 tank came out of the Reagan administration, and we've seen what the M1 tank is capable of doing across today's battlefields. On the next slide, on slide 4, what I've done is just try and give you an idea of who are the veterans in Illinois. And that's coming from the Department of Veterans Affairs website for the fiscal year 2014. You'll see there the number of wartime veterans, Gulf War veterans, Korean War veterans, World War II veterans, men and women. In fact, this past Saturday, I had dinner with Mr. Groner. Mr. Groner is my World War II veteran. He served in both the Mediterranean and the Pacific theater. He has cancer, and the cancer was caused by the X-ray machine that he was using during World War II. The challenge was he wasn't a trained X-ray person. He gave thousands and thousands of X-rays because he was the next guy up. He was a pharmacist. Okay, guess what? You're now the X-ray technician. And so he gave thousands and thousands of X-rays during the end of World War II that caused his cancer. We were able to get his claim through the system 3 years ago. The Veterans Administration paid his back pay, a substantial sum of back pay, and he gets a monthly benefit check. I bring Mr. Groner up because when we were at dinner the other night, he had his World War II veterans hat on, and to talk about the way the community reacts. His dinner was picked up by some person in the restaurant. So when we went to pay the bill, it was already paid for because Mr. Groner was a World War II veteran. That's the type of thing you see in the public today. There is a groundswell of taking care of veterans, and the idea of paying it forward for somebody like Mr. Groner. But our mission tonight is really just to that was all background information. Our mission tonight is to try and understand this Veterans Administration, try and give you some tricks of the trade, try and give you some contact information. It's not an easy system to understand. As I said, I don't completely understand it. I learn something new every day. It's a frustrating system. It's a complicated system. It wears on me when I'm working with veterans, and you feel like sometimes that you're fighting an uphill battle by yourself. And so that's what we're here tonight, to see if we can help each other out. If we can put somebody in contact with somebody who knows somebody, that always helps to get through the VA system, and just see if I can impart any knowledge that I have on this system to you to help you get the care that you rightly deserve. The first thing we have to do is talk about the VA. I'm on slide 6 now. The VA is actually composed of 3 large organizations. So when we talk about the Department of Veterans Affairs, we talk about it as a global organization, but it's really divided into 3 separate units. The Veterans Benefit Administration, that's where the disability claims are coming from. That's where the home loans are coming from. That's where the compensation's coming from. The Veterans Health Administration, that's the hospital section, right? So the Veterans Health Administration is actually the largest managed care system in the world, or in the United States. I don't know if it's the world, but it's larger than any civilian insurance agency or any insurance company. So that's what we'll go through each one of these as we go through it. And then obviously the last one is the National Cemetery Administration. Obviously the VA owns federal cemeteries, and they provide federal death benefits and burial benefits to qualified veterans. So when I talk about the Veterans Administration, and people talk about the Veterans Administration, as we know, they're talking a lot about right now the hospital care and the wait times and that type of thing. That's just looking at the one third of the Veterans Administration. I would challenge you to say that that's one part of it. The other challenging part of the Veterans Administration is the Veterans Benefit Administration, because that's where all the claim backlog is. So we got 2 sections: health care, whether veterans are getting care, and getting the proper care, and how long are they waiting. And then the other side, when the veteran turns in a claim for service-connected injury, how long are those claims taking? I can tell you they're taking a long time. The average is 3 to 5 years. I have a claim right now in the system that's been in the system for 13 years. Okay, so that Veterans Benefit System is really the albatross around the VA. So navigating the benefit system, we'll talk about the first 3 first. We'll talk about disability compensation, pension, and home loan guarantees, and I'll touch on education. Obviously, we won't talk very much about education tonight, but I'll talk about the disability compensation system, because that's where I spend most of my time, helping veterans get the benefits they're entitled to because they had a service injury or they have an injury that was aggravated by their time in service. And many veterans, especially my Vietnam veterans, they don't want to file claims. And then something happens and they feel like, no, I want to file that claim, I need that money, or for whatever reason. And then they get into this fight with the VA, and the VA keeps pushing back on them, more paperwork, more information, give me more information. And I don't think it's an active idea where the VA is trying to challenge the veteran and try and get the veteran to quit, but that's the effect that it has, to be honest with you. It has that effect on me when you read these denial letters that the VA sends out, and then you're looking at them and saying, you really didn't review that claim as well as you should have. So that's where I come in to help the veteran. Okay, so when we talk about the Veterans Benefit System and the Disability Compensation System, we're talking about a tax-free monetary benefit that's paid to veterans because they had a disability that results from their service or was aggravated by their service. Mr. Groner's cancer was caused by this x-ray machine. One of my other veterans, Mr. Walker, his back injury, we believe it was aggravated by his military service. The daughter of the Vietnam veteran, her claim is likely caused by his exposure to Agent Orange. So the claims are very varied. Many of the claims, as you might imagine, are hearing loss claims. I have hearing loss. I also have tinnitus. My hearing loss right now, the VA has recognized that I have hearing loss, but they've rated it at 0%. So they recognize that yes, you have hearing loss. Yes, it was caused by being around tanks and loud noises. However, we don't believe it's rateable yet. But they did rate my tinnitus, and the tinnitus is the ringing in the ear. The tinnitus is the inability to hear things in large groups. So I actually have a hearing aid from the VA. I don't wear it tonight. I probably should have. I apologize. But one of the things that the VA does very well is hearing aids. And I did get a real nice expensive one from the center up in Great Lakes, and I just haven't gotten into the habit of putting it in all the time. But back problems, knees, anything like that that was caused by or aggravated by military service can be an injury that the VA will compensate you for. Now, it's eligible for compensation. Whether they'll pay you for that is a different story. if you were in the service on active duty and you were injured playing baseball or football, or you were, you slid at the second base and hurt your knee, that's still a compensatable injury under the VA system because it was occurred in active duty service. So that's the range of conditions that you can have here are tremendous. When we talk about Agent Orange, the VA has come out with a list. And they've come up with a list of presumptive conditions. Many of them are cancers, many of them are diabetes, cancers, that the VA recognizes as probably caused by Agent Orange. So the VA assumes that if you put 1 foot on the ground in Vietnam, you were exposed to Agent Orange. And so they got this list of diseases that presumptively can be caused by the exposure to Agent Orange. That presumption is very big in my world because it gets me over a big hurdle. I don't have to prove a whole lot more to the VA other than the veteran served in Vietnam, he stepped foot on the ground in Vietnam, and his condition was caused by the Agent Orange. We'll talk about that. Many of the claims we have right now, obviously, that the veterans are coming back with post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury. So the IEDs that are in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're causing havoc among the troops, as you might imagine. So the vehicles that they're riding in, they're up armored, they have much more protection than the vehicles we rode in, but still, you're alive, but your brain was shaking. And so you have a traumatic brain injury, and many of these guys are struggling with trying to cope in the world today because they're put back in the world and their ability to cope is a little bit different now because of traumatic brain injury. The one thing about service-connected injury, it's not based on need, it's not based on your income, it's whether or not you have the condition. Many of the VA programs that we're going to talk about tonight, especially on the pension side, are based on need. This one's not based on need, this is simply a disability program. If you show me you have the disability and you have a doctor's nexus opinion that says that, then the VA will pay you based on a 10% scale to a 100% scale. 10% is probably about $130 a month in terms of tax-free benefit. 100% will put you over $3,000 a month in tax-free benefit. So the key is you're discharged with a condition other than dishonorable. If that's the case, then you have the right to file a claim with the VA under the disability system. There's no time limit to apply. So if you have a condition that you believe was caused by your military service, you can apply for that condition. When I was working with Mr. Groner, he first filed this claim, I think, in 2007. He was already probably 86, 87 years old. And we were able to work with him and get that cancer. And the way we worked with Mr. Groner was, you won't believe where you find the information to prove your claim. We've got the after-action reviews from the American Archives for his ship that he was on. We got the manual for the X-ray machine on Google. We Googled it, and we bought it from somebody in California. And then in that manual that came to me from 1943, it was the exact manual, technical manual to how to use that X-ray machine. And even in 1943, there was warning after warning after warning about protecting yourself from the exposure to X-rays. So even back then, it was recognized that X-rays could cause cancer. And so we were able to use that manual with the VA, including and with the information we got from the National Archives in Washington to show that Mr. Groner likely was exposed to this type of radiation. If you're going to file a claim with the VA, one of the things I certainly recommend is working with some of the veteran service organizations. Obviously the American Legion, right? Disabled Vets. All of these organizations have specialists who are veterans who help the veteran file a claim. The reason I recommend that is because if you file a claim with the VA and it's not a fully developed claim up front, you're down a list of denials that will take you years. If you file the claim and it's fully developed, you have all your information right up front, that claim's going to go through the system much quicker. I filed what you would call a fully developed claim from my ear. I filed the claim, I saw the audiologist, I explained to her what I needed, I got all my military records together first before I ever filed the claim, a full claim with the VA. This way I knew I'm putting them behind the 8 ball versus me being behind the 8 ball. If I just file a claim online and say, you know what, I think I got a back injury, will you pay me for it? The first thing the VA is going to say, we don't have enough information, give us more information, give it to us within 30 days, and then you're down that denial path with the VA that takes years to go through. So the VA claim system itself is an easy process. I can file a claim with the VA, and you'll hear the VA talk about the statistics it has about claim approvals, claim denials, and how fast they make decisions. That's absolutely true. The VA has cut down on the times that it takes the VA to make a decision. The challenge is the appeal process. That's where the backlog is. So do we make decisions fast? Yes. Are they always the right decision? No, they're not. But at least we made a decision. And I'm not going to talk whether it's right or wrong. So they do tout their statistics about making fast claim decisions, and they have gotten better about it. But the challenge with the VA and the backlog is on the appeal. That's where all the challenge is with the VA. On page 12, where I am at, those are the things that I need to do when I'm working with the veteran to prove the veteran has a claim. I have to show the VA via documentation that the veteran has a current disability. He has current hearing loss. He has type 2 diabetes. He has some form of cancer that the VA recognizes. So I have to have that. And then the other thing I have to have is evidence that the injury occurred in service. How can I get that? Well, if I'm a wartime veteran, I have a lower standard of proof because I've got a CIB. I've got my military records that show that I served in active time of war. I was with the 101st, I was with the 82nd, I was with the 442nd. I've got a lesser standard because I can show, and my military records will show, that I served with a combat unit. And so my testimony, my statement, holds a lot of weight as long as my military records back it up. So I always have my veterans create, in the legal war we call it an affidavit. In the civilian war we just call it, tell me your story. What happened? What were you doing? How did it happen? And so your testimony takes a lot of weight with the VA because you were there. And then the last thing we need here is a link between your disability and your time in service. That's where the challenge is for me right now, and that's one of the initiatives I'm working on with the John Marshall Law School. I need a link. I need to link your condition to your military service. How am I going to do that? That's where I need a doctor. And that's where a lot of this disability claim stuff takes a lot of time because many of the doctors, quite frankly, don't want to get involved. And that's where I'm working on right now, as I said, with initiative with the law school, to get doctors involved with the VA or the veteran service groups in order to provide that medical opinion that the soldier's going to need, that the veteran's going to need. The claim's not going to go very far if I don't have a medical opinion, because what's going to happen is the VA is going to get their medical opinion. And the VA medical opinion is going to say, yes, he has it, or no, she doesn't have it, or the VA opinion is going to say, no, he doesn't have it. I need to get a medical opinion that's going to say, yes, he has it. Or if the doctor tells me, Frank, he doesn't have it, then I need to find a different claim. If I can't prove that claim, we don't file frivolous claims, then doc, tell me what's the best claim then, and then we'll try and work it that way. So on page 13 is the standard of proof, and this is what I deal with and when I'm dealing with the doctors all the time. Many of the doctors don't want to get involved because they don't want to testify in court. And I tell them 150 ways till Sunday that you don't have to testify in court. No one's ever going to cross-examine you about your opinion. Doc, what I need you to do is examine my veteran, examine his or her records, and tell me whether or not it's as likely as not. That's the VA standard. It's as likely as not that his back injury, it's as likely as not that his hearing loss, it's as likely as not that whatever condition I'm trying to prove to the VA happened because of their military service. It's not a medical certainty, it's not a guarantee, but what happens here, and you can imagine, and I understand from the doctor's standpoint, if I call the doctor and say, hey doc, I'm Frank from Masuda Fanai, I'm working with Mr. Schmidt, he's my veteran, I'm going to send you a letter, and what we'd like you to do is look through these veterans' records and tell me whether or not he has this condition and write me a medical opinion. There aren't a whole lot of doctors that are willing to do that right off the top because again, they're fearful of working with the VA, they're fearful of lawyers, they're fearful of the legal system. But again, it's not a medical opinion that they're ever going to be challenged on. Obviously they can't lie, but it's not like they're going to be cross-examined in a court of law that this opinion is not truthful. So that's the biggest challenge, and the veteran's supposed to get the benefit of the doubt. So if the evidence is equal, the VA says no, the civilian doctor says yes, the veteran is supposed to get the benefit of the doubt. I can tell you from my experience with the disability claim system, that's not always the case. When you look at what the VA did and looking through the records, it's very often you don't need a law degree to read it. You just read the opinion and say, well, you didn't do a real good job here. Here's why. And so you get a chance to appeal it. But again, whenever you appeal it, that takes 2 years, 3 years, 5 years to appeal it. So on page 14, what I'm talking about is that nexus opinion. That's the opinion I need from the doctor. I need the doctor to write a letter and tell me that based on his medical opinion of Frank's condition, John's condition, that his back injury was likely or not caused by his service in the military because he was a mechanic, he was a tanker, he was an infantryman, he was whatever, that it's believable that that back injury was caused by that condition. And that's where a lot of this is going, and that's why I'm meeting with the doctor on Thursday night, who has volunteered his time, and I'm going to meet with him tomorrow, Thursday night, about helping out with the center, because he has access to other doctors. Okay, so on page, that's the disability claim system in a nutshell. That's where I spend most of my time. That's where the money is, that's where my veterans are. It's the most frustrating and rewarding process at the same time. We fight, and then if the veteran gets the benefit, they're obviously pleased, but going through that process, it'll tire you out, and it really does wear on your nerves going through that process. But you can't stop fighting. You got to keep going. You got to keep fighting as long as you have something to fight with. So that's the compensation system. The other system that the VA talks about on the disability side is on page 15. That's the pension system. That's a little bit different system. It's still based on a disability, but this system, unlike the disability, the pension system is really based on need. So the pension system is designed to help veterans who may not have the financial wherewithal to carry on a daily life. So it's based on a need-based system where in this system here, you have to have a wartime service. That's our first one, right? So you have to be a wartime veteran. The second point there, and we'll see it on the next page, you had to have a disability, and we'll talk about what a disability means, because age itself is considered a disability for the VA under the pension system. So we've got a wartime service, discharge under dishonorable conditions. You'll see that terminology through most of the VA benefits. We're not going to pay a veteran who is dishonorably discharged VA benefits. So you'll see that language, other than dishonorable conditions, in most of the VA benefit system. So we have that concept. And then we have this concept where they had to serve on active duty for a period of time. And you see there, based on when the veteran entered service, there's a different requirement. But the key is that it's a wartime veteran who served on active duty for a period of time based on that system. On slide 16, what we talk about is being totally disabled. When we talk about totally disabled, we're talking about age 65, you're presumed to be disabled. If you're collecting Social Security benefits, presumed to be disabled. Now obviously, as we know in today's world, that doesn't mean you're disabled, but that's the way this benefit system, this pension benefit, is still under the disability compensation system, so that's what they're focusing on. The real requirement there is that third point, though. It is a need-based system. So the government will come out every year with a new amount, and then it's a dollar for dollar offset if you're above that amount. So it's probably, I don't know the exact number now, it's probably about $17,000 a year. If you're making more than that, then they'll start subtracting from that. So it is a disclosure finances to the VA, and then we'll determine whether or not you were a wartime veteran, you're disabled, and whether or not you truly have a need. Home loan guarantee, obviously many of you are aware of that benefit. That's the same benefit that we talked about earlier, where the VA will guarantee home loans for service members and veterans. That's the exact same program in many ways as the original GI Bill, and that program is still in force today as we go through it. There's numerous education programs, as you might imagine. The Montgomery GI Bill, the post 9/11 benefits for the veterans that served after 9/11. There's different scholarships available. The idea being, obviously, that we want to encourage veterans to enlist. One of the reasons veterans enlist in the military to begin with is for the educational benefits. And so the idea was, if we can enhance those benefits, we would get more veterans to enlist. All of these education benefits, obviously, as you might imagine, have specific requirements to them. Too many to mention for this presentation here, but if you have any questions on these veterans benefits in terms of education, I can certainly get you more information on them. On page 19, now we have the Veterans Health Administration. This one is the other big part of the VA. the Veterans Health Administration, and this is basically our hospital care, right? The challenge with the VA hospital care is, although the Veterans Health System is the largest component in the VA sphere between if you disability, hospital, cemetery, it's the largest component. It's also one of the more trickier to navigate as well for the veteran because the VA operates under priority groups. And so the VA hospital system is very well developed. There's many hospitals, as you see there. There's 152 VA hospitals. There's 800 community-based care centers out there, 126 nursing care units. But what the VA has to do, though, the VA operates like a civilian insurance company in many ways, in that they went to a managed care model in 1996. And so under the managed care system, as you see in the civilian world, much of the care that's being given today is in outpatient clinics. And so that's where the VA is working as well. You don't see as many hospital admissions anymore. You see more community-based care. You see more people being sent to outside agencies, which is all good. Those are all good things. So the VA has modernized its approach to care. The challenge that the VA has, it's typically underfunded. And that's why you have priority groups. So when we talk about priority groups, and you'll see them on the next couple of slides, based on your disability, based on your condition, based on whether or not you have the Purple Heart or the Medal of Honor or your income, you're placed in a different priority group. And that's how the VA essentially rations care. So who gets the first priority? Well, it's going to be those veterans who have a 50% disability or greater. Okay? Who gets second priority? Those veterans with a 30 or 40% disability or rating or higher. Who's third priority? Purple Heart, Medal of Honor, 10% rating. So we'll see those. And when you talk about lines at the VA, that's part of the reason why there's lines at the VA, because it's chronically underfunded. So the VA has to prioritize the care to the veterans that it has in that area. Many of the VA hospitals, as you might imagine, shift based on population. So you'll see veterans hospitals closing, veteran hospitals opening. The VA is trying to follow the veterans population to have those hospitals and care centers exactly where they need to be based on the veteran population. So on slide 20 there, what we're going to talk about here again, the services that the VA provides, medication co-pays, long-term care type services, and we'll go through the Veterans Administration, the hospital system, to the best that we can. Just to give you a flavor on page 21, those are some of the bigger VA hospitals here in the Chicago area. Many of you may be going there right now, or maybe you've had a chance to go to Jesse Brown or Hines or the Lovell Center up in Great Lakes. That's the one I go to. That's where I got my hearing aid from. They were the nicest people in the world up there. They were very, very accommodating. The VA does have some very good people working for it. Does it get a bad name for a couple of bad apples? Yes, it does. Does the VA disability claim system get a bad name because of a couple of bad apples? Yes, it does. So it's not the bad system that everybody has said it is. Do I have struggles with it? Yes, I do. Did my dad have struggles with it? Yes, he did. Are you having struggles with it? Maybe you are. So hopefully today we can alleviate some of those struggles. But here's the major clinics, and there's a lot more services that the VA provides. They're providing a lot more care, as I said, on an outpatient basis. They're providing a lot more care in the communities. So when my dad was disabled, the last probably 6 months of his life, he was homebound at home. And so the VA had a nurse come to the house every 3 days to take care of him. And then we were able to provide the care the other 2 days. So there's things like that you see in the civilian world that the VA is doing as well to take care of the veteran population. As you might imagine, on page 22, that's just a brief summary of the services that the VA provides. Again, it's a full array of services that the VA provides. Inpatient care, outpatient care, surgical care, rehabilitation care, skilled nursing home care, prescription drug cards, prescription glasses. Depending on your priority group and your income, that determines whether or not care is free for you or there's a small copay for it. So depending on your priority group, that will help determine whether or not you have to pay for the VA care or it's received free of charge. For example, my hearing aid, the civilian audiologist that I went to estimated that hearing aid would probably cost north of $3,000. The VA gave it to me for free. They gave me batteries for it. Again, as I said, they were the nicest people in the world up there. I need to go up there and get it recalibrated because everything is so loud. But that's my fault, not the VA's fault. And they're doing a lot of work with the veteran centers here in the communities. These veteran centers are really designed, they were really developed after Vietnam, to give the Vietnam veterans a place to go and talk about Vietnam and how they were in a war zone one day and then they're back in the United States the next day. And you hear the stories about veterans getting to the airport and the protest outside the airport, and the veteran takes his uniform off in the airport, in the restroom at the airport. You'll see if he's afraid to go outside in their uniform. The country has changed, obviously. You don't see that anymore. You see more of the veteran being revered again. But the Vet Center is really designed to take care of the veterans. Vietnam is where it started, but really it's designed to take care of all veterans today. And these are clinics in the cities. I don't have all of them here on the chart, but they're great clinics for the veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan to step into and say, hey, I'm having trouble readjusting. Can you help me find a job? I'm having trouble with my spouse. I'm having trouble with the bills. And the law school as well, the John Marshall Law School again. They're not just handling legal services for the veterans. They're trying to provide whatever they can and get the veteran to the care that he or she needs. As I'm working on the doctor initiative, the John Marshall Law School is actually working on an initiative for medical care in the lower part of Illinois, the underserved counties, because those veterans don't have access to the same care we have up here. So what do we do about those veterans who are in communities where they don't have access to care that they have at Hines or Lovell or any of the clinics we have up here? So there's a huge initiative there. On page 23, that's the basic eligibility for veterans medical care. So even though you're a veteran, that doesn't necessarily mean you're entitled to medical care. You have to meet the basic requirements here of eligibility. So a person who served in the active military, naval or air service, you were discharged and released under other than dishonorable conditions, and you basically served your tour. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who served the tour that they signed up for. And then you have on page, 24 there, you have to actually enroll. So just because I'm a veteran, it doesn't mean I'm enrolled in the system. I physically have to enroll for VA healthcare. So I got to go online and do it. I've got to go to the hospital and do it. I can download the forms and mail it in, or I can call it in. Whatever easier for me. If I want VA healthcare, then there's only 4 cases where I wouldn't have to enroll, but most of us have to enroll for it. And then once I enroll, the VA will take that information and place me in a priority group. And those priority groups determine how fast do I get care, how fast am I seen. So when the Congress gives the VA an appropriations budget, and the VA says, okay, we got this much money for next year, that's how they allocate care. So you're not guaranteed care. And when we talk about lines at the VA, waiting a year to get in to see a doctor, a lot of that is because the veteran hasn't enrolled in the system and he or she is put on the end of the line at that point in time. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we've got our 8 priority groups. Obviously on page 25, I start talking to you about the priority groups. There's groups 1 through 8. Obviously the lower your number, the higher your priority. So if you look on page 25, group 1, veterans with a 50% disability rating receive the highest priority. That means if I have Mr. Groner, he's got a 100% disability rating. If he calls the VA today, he's a World War II veteran, they should take him sooner than they take me. That's how the priority group works. So if 2 people are calling at the same time with the same condition, they're going to take the person with the higher priority group, unless it's a life-threatening condition. So if I have a heart attack, although Mr. Groner is a World War II veteran, he's 92 years old, if he calls and I call at the same time, but my condition is life-threatening, then the VA will take me first. But in general, they're going to take the person with the higher priority grouping. Group 2, as we see there, veterans with a 30 or 40% disability rating. Again, that disability rating is so important, right? Because that helps your priority of care. That gets you seen by the medical side of the house. And again, the VA is a big bureaucracy, but there are ways that we can figure out how to work with the system. Again, priority group 3, prisoners of war, Medal of Honor winners, 10% disability ratings. And then as we go down and down and down the priority group ratings, when we get to priority group ratings 7 and 8, those veterans may actually have to pay a copay for the benefits that they receive. They didn't have wartime service, they have an injury, but it's not service connected. So obviously, if my injury is service connected, like my hearing, or Mr. Groner's cancer, or Mr. Walker's back, those are service-connected injuries, they have a higher priority rating. If I have a back problem, but it's not service-connected, it's because I hurt myself playing softball, I've got a lower priority rating for the VA purposes. On page 27, we have groups 4 and 5. Again, we're going down the list. On page 28, we have group 6. Again, a lower priority rating. Group 7 and 8 are on page 29. Again, lower priority rating. And then on page 30 is the last part of group 8. Again, the lowest priority rating. On page 31, I just talked about the medication copays. Again, although I may be able to get my prescription drugs from the VA, I may have a copay depending on my priority group rating. Again, probably a smaller copay than you have in the civilian world, but again, it's still a copay. If I'm in priority group 7 or 8 for medical care services, I may have a copay for VA healthcare. So again, depending on my priority group is going to determine everything. That's why it's important to enroll, even if you don't think you need VA healthcare today. If you go in tomorrow and say, hey, I need VA healthcare, and you're not enrolled in the system, they're not going to take you because you're not in their system. Long-term care services are on page 32. Long-term care is interesting, obviously, as we know. There's a lot more Americans needing long-term care services. My dad needed long-term care services from the VA. It's a very expensive process, as we know. Long-term care, when I was working at the insurance company, long-term care premiums or long-term care services at just a basic nursing facility, $3,000 a month. My mom's facility in New Jersey was already at $4,500 a month in 1997. So the VA, like Medicare, is pushing people out of the hospital quicker and getting them into the skilled nursing facilities or intermediate care facilities, because although that's a different form of care, it's still less than VA healthcare. So if you need that skilled care or intermediate care, then the VA will get you into a nursing home that either that they own or it's a wing of the VA medical facility. So it may be a hospital that's large enough that has a skilled nursing facility attached to it. The VA has a lot of contracts with private facilities. So when my dad needed VA long-term care services, they actually put him in a private facility in New Jersey. I'm not saying it was a good facility, but it was a private facility in New Jersey. My dad and mom were probably 5 miles apart in the state of New Jersey, both of them in a nursing home at the same time, and the skill and care that they received was light years apart. Just absolutely light years apart in terms of what they got based on what you were paying for. So again, prior to 1999, all VA long-term care services were on a maybe basis. In 1999, the law was passed that said, no, VA, you have to provide long-term care services for certain veterans. And if you look there on page 32, if the veteran has a service-connected disability, or the veteran has a service-connected disability that's rated 70% or more, the VA has to pay for their skilled nursing care facility. So if I have a veteran like Mr. Groner, his disability rating is over 100%. When it comes time for him to go to a VA facility, they have to take him because he has a greater than 70% disability rating. Now, if you think about that from a financial planning standpoint, that's huge. That's a huge benefit to Mr. Groner. Now, I'm not saying the care he's going to get, but in terms of financial output for the family, if the VA has to take the individual, they simply have to take him. And again, the VA has a lot more contracts with private facilities as the years go by. All other veterans are based on available resources. So if I don't have a 70% rating, which I don't, I've got a 10% rating. So I'm on the if we have anything left list. Frank, if we have income available and we have a spot for you and it works out for us, we'll give you that. But if we don't have a spot for you, then you're not on our priority list. On page 33 is the National Cemetery Administration. Again, this is probably the smallest part of the VA system, as you might imagine. They only have one claim. They don't have multiple claims. There's no appeals. It's a pretty simple process for the VA in terms of the cemetery administration. The VA, on page 34, the VA operates about 132 national cemeteries. My parents are buried in a national cemetery in New Jersey that's a federal cemetery. They have 73 that are open for both new casket and cremation interments. Burial for the VA means both cremation and in-ground burial. So there's a lot more at the VA level where they're saying, okay, there's a lot more people, whether for religious beliefs or cultural beliefs, you don't have to be buried in the ground anymore for the VA to consider it a burial. An urn in a calabrium is considered a burial for VA purposes. There's also about 60 state cemeteries that the VA will provide a marker for or a headstone for. And when we talk about planning with the VA and talking about the National Cemetery Association administration, we're really actually talking about lessening the burden for the family members who have to do this. Now, I will tell you that many of the funeral directors are well versed in VA benefits. They're well versed in getting the veteran and his or her family in the right area in terms of whether or not the cemetery will take a veteran, whether they'll take the government headstone or the government marker. Well, let's just go through this pretty quickly here. If you're going to be buried in the national cemetery, so this is a federal cemetery, the VA will basically cover the entire cost except for the casket and the transportation. So if I'm buried like where my parents are in the National Cemetery in New Jersey, the VA paid for the gravesite and the liner. They opened and closed it. The headstone that's there for my parents, the VA paid for that as well. The burial flag, the VA paid for that as well, or provided that as well. The funeral honors, the playing of taps, the VA did that as well. And as many of you know, obviously, most of the funeral and taps is not really done by the VA. It's done by a military unit assigned to do that. So when I was on active duty, our unit was assigned to funeral detail for a month. And so if a veteran died in Kentucky and our unit got the call, then we would provide the detail for the funeral. Presidential Memorial Certificate and Perpetual Care. So my parents right now, as I said, are in the Doyle Cemetery in New Jersey. It's about an hour from my brother's house. Now, they're in the same grave, and most of the veterans there are. You can't reserve a grave in a national cemetery. As you look in the national cemeteries, you'll basically see it's year by year. So you just follow it down, and that's kind of, quite honestly, the way I find my parents most of the time, because you just go down the line. Oh, okay, we're in the right year. They're down here somewhere. And that's what it is. So there's no cost to the family in a national cemetery. Headstone and markers. This is the challenge that we have when we do a civilian cemetery. If it's a national cemetery, a federal cemetery that the VA owns, the VA will provide the headstone and marker. And so it'll have the veteran's name, his date of birth, her date of birth, date of death, service that they were in, and then any awards that the family may want to put on there. So if you want to put, Purple Heart, Medal of Honor, Korea, Vietnam, World War II, you'll see that on the headstones in the military cemetery. And then if there's already a marker, for example, if you had a veteran who passed and the veteran served in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and you didn't know the VA provided a headstone or a marker, the VA will still provide a medallion to put on that headstone. Or they'll actually provide the headstone or marker if you wanted to have two. So again, most of the time with the funeral home directors, they're experts at coordinating this type of care for the family when the time comes. And that's what I have there in the bottom. The next of kin of the funeral director is really key there. Arlington Cemetery. Arlington Cemetery is not run by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Arlington Cemetery is actually run by the Department of the Army. If you wanted to be buried in Arlington Cemetery, the eligibility requirements are obviously a little bit stricter. So you can't just simply be a veteran. You have to be a specific type of veteran to get into Arlington. In the last page there, number 37, why would you do the planning and the funeral director? As I said, you can't pre-plan your funeral in the national cemetery. You can't say, well, I want this spot under this tree because that's closest, whatever. I don't want to be next to the road. You can't say anything like that. But what you can do, obviously, is pre-planning, and this is one of the things that we did not do well with my dad. He wanted to be buried in his uniform. Well, the challenge with that is we thought we had his uniform, but we didn't. We had parts of it, and then we had to, I had a buddy on active duty at the time, he had to get the rest of it. So again, if you wanted to be buried in your uniform, then you would have to obviously get that uniform together now, get the ribbons together, get the badges together, nameplates, those types of things. Have it all ready, because when the time comes, I was fortunate that I had somebody who was still serving on active duty who could provide that. And the other thing, the most important thing, is the discharge paperwork. So the last point there, your discharge paperwork is what the funeral director is going to need, because that's going to determine for him or her what you're entitled to. So when they look at the discharge paperwork and it says DD 214 honorable discharge, you're good to go. If the discharge paperwork says bad conduct discharge, you're not going to be buried in the military cemetery, or you may not be entitled to all of the VA benefits that the cemetery administration can provide. Assistance and contact. As we know, the VA regional office is downtown on Taylor Street. But what I've found very helpful is working with the veteran service officers, either with the American Legion, disabled vets. The veteran service officers, they're very good at understanding the VA system. If you go to the hospital, there's usually a service officer up front. He or she can direct you on the type of care you may receive, or the person you need to talk to. We've all been with the VA. We've all gotten a little bit of a runaround once in a while. So it's critical, if I'm going to file a claim, to have a veteran service officer help me. My brother out in Washington State, I think he was with the disabled vets. I think they helped him, shepherd him through the claim system. And so when he filed his claim was fully developed before the VA got it. And so the VA now is on the defensive to say he doesn't have the condition versus my brother proving he has the condition. So that speeds up the process. And then the last thing there would be the John Marshall Law School. Again, I can't tell you enough about the law school. That clinic on Jackson and Plymouth Court, if you ever get a chance to go down there and take a look at it, it's strictly for veterans. It's a huge clinic. It's as big as this room here, and it's staffed by students. It's run by 2 attorneys and a director, but the students do all the good work in that center. They really do, and they don't get the credit for it, but the memos I get from the students, that tells me exactly which way I need to go to help the veteran in the quickest way possible. Command and Single, you've got my contact information there on page 40. I'm glad to help you in any way I can. I don't know all the answers. I won't pretend that I do. The VA system, I learn something new every day. I learn a different way to skin the cat when I work with the VA. All I can tell you in working with the VA is don't get frustrated. If you're entitled to the benefit, we keep fighting. That's what we've been taught to do, and so that's what we continue to do. Yeah, that's all I have in terms of a presentation. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be glad to help you out in any way I can. Yes, ma'am.
If a veteran has long-term care but is being taken care of at home, is he entitled to some compensation?
He's not entitled to compensation, but if the veteran qualifies under the 70% disability rating and is enrolled, then that care may be able to be provided by the VA. So if the veteran has, that's what I'm saying, if the veteran's enrolled in the system, that's the first step. Because now I can get the veteran in the system, and then if I get that rating, or that healthcare rating, then, like my dad, the nurse came 3 days a week. So she came to take care of my dad 3 days a week, and then we took care of him the other days. So the VA has a very well-developed home health care system. Nursing aides, Meals on Wheels, they have a lot of programs. They don't have Meals on Wheels. The American Legion Post provided that for my dad. So they would come over on Sunday and make his meals for the week. And then what would happen is when the VA nurse came, she would take care of my dad on those, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I don't remember the days it was, and she would take a meal out of the refrigerator. So what it is when you're working with the VA, it's like when you're working in the civilian world, you put together a care plan. Okay, the VA can do 3 days, I can do Monday, my brother can do Tuesday, the American Legion's going to come on Sunday, and so you put together a plan to help take care of the veteran because, like any people, whether they're a veteran or not, they want to spend time in their home. So that's where my dad wanted his care, obviously all the way up until he couldn't have it there any longer, and that's when he went to the nursing facility.
The other thing is, if you're buried in the National Cemetery, everything, most of the things are paid for. But what about if you're buried in a private cemetery?
No. A private cemetery, the VA does not provide care for or payment for. What the VA will provide in a private cemetery is the flag. Depending on availability, they'll also provide, if there's a local Army unit, Marine unit nearby, they'll provide military honors for that, and they'll provide a headstone and marker. But they're not providing the grave, they're not providing anything in a civilian cemetery. Other than the flag the burial honors and the grave site. The grave marker or medallion, if one, the cemetery accepts it, or two, the family wants it. So when there's where the veteran has already passed, but he or she still wants a medallion on the gravestone that says U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, Marines, whatever, we still have to check with both the funeral director and the cemetery itself to ensure that they would allow that. Because many cemeteries, as you know, the gravestones are all the same. Obviously, many of them are different, but some cemeteries, they have the same gravestone. And that's consistent with the veteran cemeteries as well. Everybody in the veteran cemetery where my parents are, it's all the same gravestone. So you could not in a veteran cemetery bring your own headstone. No, everybody has the same here. We're all the same.
But you can't pick, what if they have the grave marker there already?
If you have a grave marker there, then the VA will provide the medallion for it. Or if you wanted the VA to also provide a headstone, they will. But it's one of those things where, why would you have two markers? I don't understand that portion of it.
No, I mean, if we have the headstone, is it retroactive that we can claim for?
No.
The cost? Oh.
No, it's at the time. It's at the time. Yes, sir.
Does the wife have to be a veteran?
To be buried in a cemetery?
Yes.
No. My mom's not a veteran. Her and my dad are buried in the same grave. I don't know if they want to be, but they are. Yes, sir.
I'll call back retroactively can the benefits be delayed, if you will. For someone who's, say, due $300 for something, some kind of expense, and he or she didn't get it, can that benefits be claimed 20 years later? Or?
No, that's actually the challenge with the disability claim. What you mean from the disability claim side?
I'm not sure what you said on asking.
So is it for a back condition or something like that? It's a disability?
I thought it was really asking in terms of burial benefits.
Oh, burial benefits. I'm sorry. There is no retroactive claim system, so there's no retroactive payment. So it's a benefit that's paid. It's a benefit that's provided when the veteran passes. There's no retroactivity to it.
But one doesn't know when he died, right? So there must be some period of 30 days, 2 months that the family can go and claim the benefits.
No. So if I was to die tomorrow,
Right.
my wife goes to the funeral director and says, Frank wants to be buried in a military cemetery with military honors. Then the funeral director takes it from there. So there's no way you can go pre-plan it or go retroactive. When that event happens, and that veteran dies, that kicks the VA in. Now, you bring up a good point. Then I thought you were going down the disability side. So on the disability side, the claim, it makes sense to file the claim as soon as possible because that's the date that the VA sets as the claim date. So if you're thinking about, do I have a claim, maybe I'm not, it's better to file the claim and get that date set because once the VA does start paying, it's from the date you filed the claim. So I'm working with the veteran right now and he's struggling with the fact that he's had hearing loss since the 1950s. And he's struggling with the VA should be paying me since the 1950s. But you didn't file a claim in 1950, you're filing a claim today. And so the VA is not going to pay you back pay in the 1950s when you believe you had the hearing loss for the first time. So it's the date of claim is what the VA is going to use. The date you filed that claim is the date the VA is going to use for entitlement to benefits. Yes, sir.
So the first thing that one needs to do is enroll in the system.
Correct. For medical care. For medical care, you have to be enrolled. You don't have to be enrolled. So for medical care, you have to be enrolled in the system. If I want to get medical care from the VA in a hospital, nursing home, outpatient clinic, I have to be enrolled in the system. I have to go online, I have to visit the hospital, fill in an application, I have to be enrolled. For the disability claim system, I have to file a claim. I don't need to be enrolled in anything. And then obviously for the cemetery system, there's nothing to enroll in. I just need my DD 214, my declaration that says I departed service under honorable conditions. That's what the funeral director needs, and that's obviously typically the document that the dependent spouse may not have available very quickly. That's what holds up a lot of that at the end, because the veteran dies, he or she dies, and the family's running around looking for the discharge paperwork. It's that DD 214 that gives the funeral director the right to act on behalf of the family. That says, call the cemetery and say, look, Frank died today, there's going to be a viewing, 2 days viewing, he'll be there Thursday. Tell me where to go. And that starts the whole process in place for the cemetery to make sure there's a grave open, there's a liner in it, the military's on board, we've got a flag, we've got all that stuff going. So the funeral director at the funeral home really takes on the burden of planning for the family, as long as the family has the discharge paperwork. Yes, sir.
I don't want to hog all the questions here. You said you have a 0% disability.
Correct.
So you obviously are enrolled and you underwent medical examination and you're given 0%.
Okay. So when we talk, right, I'm sorry.
So one needs to undergo that medical examination to establish some kind of percentage of disability.
Right.
And that needs to be done by the VA system.
Well, the VA is going to send you for a medical exam if they think you need it. So in my case, so again, just to be clear, when I talk about enrollment, I'm only talking about healthcare. When I talk about knee conditions or back conditions or my hearing condition, there's nothing to enroll in. I just file a claim. So when I filed the claim for hearing loss with the VA, again, as I said earlier, I put together the claim all by myself before I ever filed it. And so what I wanted to do was streamline the amount of time that the VA would take to process my claim. So I saw a civilian audiologist and said, I'm thinking about filing a claim with the VA. Here's what I need. I need a hearing exam. Here's the standards for the hearing exam that the VA requires. Are you willing to write a medical opinion at the end of this hearing exam that says that my hearing loss is as likely as not caused by my exposure to tank fire, tank noise? And with the civilian audiologist, her office is in Palatine, I had to do an education for her. Hearing loss? How could you have hearing loss? Weren't you wearing earplugs? No. It's kind of hard to hear the radios in a tank with the earplugs in. So it's an education process for the doctor, because if the doctor's never been exposed to the military, there's a perception of the military that, well, everybody's wearing earplugs, right? No, nobody's wearing earplugs. So we don't wear earplugs. When that main gun went off by my ear, I've got hearing loss. So it was an education process for her, walking her through the VA system. She said, yes, if you have the condition, I'm willing to write it. So I did the hearing test with the civilian doctor, put that together. I got my military records myself. If you've never done that, I recommend you do it. If you've never requested your military records from St. Louis, I recommend that you do it. You can go on the VA website and request your military records. It's great because it brings back memories. You can request them for your parents. If you have a relationship with a military member, you can request their records. So I requested my dad's records. My uncle requested his dad's records. And his dad served in the Marines at Iwo Jima. And I'm not kidding. Those records came to him as if someone went to a filing cabinet, opened it up, and said, 1945, Tom McCoy, here it is, and sent him the records. And his pictures in there, and the schools he went to, and everything, his mother, and the $10,000 worth of life insurance. It is literally an experience like no other, because it connects you to the past. And all of his orders were in there as well. They took him across the Pacific. Tom McCoy here, Tom McCoy there, Tom McCoy here, Tom McCoy there. And so he ends up at Iwo Jima. And it says what ship he went in on at Iwo Jima. I don't remember the name of the ship now, but I Googled it like everybody would do. And so it turns out that the second flag raising on Iwo Jima, they took that flag from his ship. And so again, you just never know what you're going to find in the military record. So if you haven't done that, I recommend you do it. Sorry. So going back to the claim. So before I filed the claim, I got my military records. I wrote my statement of what happened. Why was I exposed to loud noises? I was at airborne school, I was at ranger school, I was a tanker. We fired main gun rounds, we qualified tanks, mortar pool noise, the tank engines. So what you're doing is you're telling the VA the story about why you believe you have hearing loss. And the VA has to accept that to a level. So I turn my claim into the VA. The VA says, thank you for your claim. Please go to Great Lakes Naval Hospital and have a hearing exam done by one of our doctors. Okay? So they schedule me to go up to Great Lakes, I go up to Great Lakes, have the hearing exam. That audiologist concurs that my hearing loss is likely as not caused by my service in the military. That medical opinion goes with my doctor's medical opinion, and the VA provides care. That was easy, because it only took 6 months. The veterans that I'm working with right now, they haven't been as lucky, so they're in the appeals process. And what I'm struggling with many of them is the VA doctor's opinions are very often not as well thought out, I guess is the best way to say it, as a civilian doctor's opinion. And very often, at least the claims I've worked on, there'll be a negative statement made, and that negative statement will follow that veteran through every claim appeal, because the doctor will say the veteran doesn't have this, the veteran doesn't have that, and you'll see that same statement follow them through all their levels of appeals. It's frustrating at times to work with the VA doctor to get it through. But again, we won't give up. It's frustrating, we keep going. So my hearing is rated at, I do have hearing loss in both ears. My left is worse than my right. My hearing loss is not severe enough to be rated at 10% or greater. But by rating it at 0%, they recognize that I do have this condition. So I do have hearing loss, it just doesn't meet our chart yet. By rating it at 0, as my hearing deteriorates, then I have the opportunity to put a claim in for additional benefit later. So right now, I don't get paid for hearing loss, I get paid for the tinnitus, which is what many of the veterans that I work with are being paid for right now. Obviously, when you have a hearing claim, one of the things that the VA throws at the veteran right away is his or her age. Of course you've got hearing loss, you're 50 years old. Of course you have hearing loss, you're 70 years old. Of course you have hearing loss, you were a railroad mechanic. So you have to dispel those things as you're filing the claim that, yes, I'm 70 years old, but I never had hearing loss prior to this. Yes, I was one of the veterans I'm working with. He was a railroad mechanic, but the train engines were never running. That's the God's honest truth. He was a salesperson for the railroad. When he wasn't selling for the railroad, he was a mechanic for the railroad, but the train engine was never running. It was called deadhead mechanic. So yes, he was a mechanic, but once the VA saw a railroad, of course you have hearing loss, you were a railroad mechanic. No, one more time. The engines were never running. Of course you have hearing loss, you were a railroad mechanic. One more time. The engines were never running. So he's been frustrated in that process working with the VA because they keep throwing the same objection at him and he keeps throwing the same answer back at him. The trains were never running, so the train did not cause my hearing loss. And again, some of that stuff is rampant through the VA system where you don't always get the best claims examiner looking at your record because they can get that claim off their desk fast. If they can get that claim off their desk pretty fast, at least the ones I've worked on, they'll do it. Because you look at the claim and you say common sense would suggest that that person has the condition that they're claiming they have, and you're giving them a real hard time for no reason. So that's my political commentary, but that's what I've experienced with the VA in terms of disability claims. You had a question, sir?
I think you answered it. If a person has a certain level of like 50%, they think they should have more, they just put in a new claim?
Absolutely, but so you put in a new claim for a higher rating. But obviously, as you might imagine, it's really kind of a new claim, right? Because if you've got 50% and you're saying my hearing got worse, or my back got worse, or my cancer got worse, or my whatever got worse, you're basically proving a new claim over again. So why should I give you 70%? Well, as I said, my hearing is rated at 0%. So as my hearing gets worse, if I choose to, I can submit a new claim for my hearing getting worse, they at least have recognized that the Army caused it, and now I have to suggest to them why it's worse now. So it's starting over, but it's a little bit easier because you're already in the system.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, would the peacetime veterans qualify for most of these federal support?
The peacetime veterans qualify for some benefits. The wartime veterans qualify for many more veterans. But I think you would consider me a peacetime veteran. Although I served on active duty, I didn't serve in Iraq in 1991. So all of my service was active duty service at Fort Knox, and then in the reserves. So I would, although I'm technically a wartime veteran because I served during the first Iraq War, I didn't serve in combat. So if you have a peacetime veteran, the question is whether or not you were on active duty at the time. For me, my active duty service for peacetime, so pretend the first Gulf War didn't happen, I would still be considered a veteran because I served from 88 to 90 before the first Gulf War started. So I'd still be entitled to benefits, even though there was no declared war against Iraq. Any other questions on the VA benefits? If I can help you in any way, again, I don't know all the answers. I learn about the VA every day. It's a large system. It's a complex system. It's a troubling system. I believe it can be simplified. I believe it can be improved. And I don't believe it should take 20, 30, 40 years to do that. If the veterans would band together, I think the VA would change overnight because we would just simply vote out the congressmen who are prohibiting the VA from improving. That's my own political commentary, but I think that's where we are. We're strong. If the veterans organizations would unite instead of being separated, you'd have one voice that would change the world fairly quickly. Thank you.